Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and we are here ready to talk to you. In fact, we're going to speak with you for the next 2 hours because it is Thursday, and we're normally here for 2 hours on Thursday, including today. So give us a call. 888-564-6173 is the number. 888-564-6173. He just got in my shot. Who's he? Phil Metzger from Calvary San Diego. He's here a whole 4 days early. 1 hour early. Whatever. You know what I mean. Phil is normally on the second hour Thursdays, but today he's joining us for both hours and here in the studio. How cool is that? So, Phil, great to have you here. Put on your headphones. Otherwise, Bobby Conway, you won't be able to hear what he has to say.
I won't be able to talk to him. I'm glad. I'm sorry I cut off your camera view there.
Yeah, that's all right.
People need to see how amazing you are.
No, not at all.
At all times.
So while Phil is continuing to get set up, I will also introduce Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also the guy you see on the Christianity Still Makes Sense YouTube channel. And he's the guy you guys are going to see, you junior highers and high schoolers, this Saturday at Reliance Church in Temecula here in Southern California. You can go to reliancechurch.something. I'll find out right now. And you can register, get more details about it. It's reliancechurch.org. I knew that. Go to the upcoming events tab, and then you can find out about this apologetics conference that's happening from 10 to 4.
Wait, Bobby, you're going to be in Temecula? What?
Yeah. How about that, dude?
Dude, let's connect. You're going to be right down the street. That's like an hour away.
I know, right? Man, I know. I'm speaking there in the morning, but then I'm flinging over to Santa Ana or Costa Mesa on Saturday during the day. By the way, is that shirt from Urban Outfitters? Because if so, I think I have the same one.
How funny! It was my father-in-law's shirt. So I don't know where it's from. I don't know. I'm not cool enough.
Check the back of it.
I know. I'll have Brian Perez check later.
Off camera, because,
yeah. It'll get a little awkward.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. We don't want that. All right, so give us a call with your questions at 888-564-6173. And as we wait for more calls and questions to come in, we're going to begin by discussing something that Bobby Conway wanted to bring up. And I think it's a good topic, interesting topic. It is C.S. Lewis and why every Christian should read C.S. Lewis books. Bobby, tell us. Are you the president of the C.S. Lewis fan club? Is that why you want people to, do you get a dime for every book sold? Tell us what's going on.
Well, I'm actually getting ready to start a C.S. Lewis Institute in our church, and it'll be kind of a book club whereby I'm going to invite the flock, and people in the community can be a part of it, but it'll be during the week, and I'm just going to be walking through the life of Lewis and the works of Lewis, and it will be an opportunity for people to become familiarized with him. Some of the stuff that's great about Lewis, he is for all the age ranges, right? He's written children's books with Narnia and his space trilogy. Narnia was the greatest selling children's book series out before J.K. Rowling's book trumped it.
Wow.
And so Harry Potter has taken the front on that, but the amount of books that Lewis's work has sold is unprecedented. He was born in Belfast, Ireland. He's actually an Irishman in 1898, and he actually died in Oxford, England on the same exact day that President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. And his death was kind of in the background because of the attention that was given to Kennedy's assassination. But today, due to movies being put out on Narnia, due to his books, due to all the different types of organizations related to the life of C.S. Lewis, his influence is even more significant. He grew up in a way that he knew pain, lost his mother at the age of 9. His father was demoralized, checked out, and Lewis was left with his brother Warnie. And C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, his nickname was Jack, and that's whom he was affectionately referred to as. And he basically had some incredibly wise tutors in his life. He would accumulate learning several languages, about 8 or 9 languages that he would become fluent in. Just an amazing mind that he had. He would write so fast. His brain was just a factory of producing words. In fact, he would write so fast and so well that he hardly had to do drafts over his writings. But his journey is a story of moving from atheism to theism to Christianity. And so he moves from atheism and then he moves to theism. And while he's teaching as a professor at Oxford and then later in his career at Cambridge, but while at Oxford, he built a relationship with J.R.R. Tolkien. And so he was part of the Inklings, a group that would meet at the pub, the Eagle and Child, and they would talk about their future works that they were working on. And so Tolkien would talk about Lord of the Rings, and Lewis would talk about his space trilogy. And it was just such great bonding times for them. But when Lewis ended up believing in theism, he said he's the most reluctant convert in all of England. And his salvation story is one in which he was riding on the sidecar of his brother Warnie's motorcycle. And they were on their way to the zoo. He'd been reflecting on Christianity for quite some time. And as he was on the way to the zoo, his conversion story is one that goes like this. When I got in my brother's sidecar on the way to the zoo, I wasn't a Christian. And when I arrived at the zoo, I was. And it's such a great story of a life being transformed. And so, after becoming a Christian, he would just absolutely become this great apologist. Now, keep in mind, what a task that is to become considered the greatest apologist of the 20th century, but your first role is an English lit professor. I mean, he would even acknowledge, I'm just a layman in this stuff, but he blew people away with his skill to write. And so what are some reasons that I would say that people should read Lewis? Well, as I said, if you're parents, he is a great author to introduce your kids to, as you can read your kids his Narnia, which is a 7-volume series, children's series, and his Space Trilogy, which is 3 volumes. And this will open the imagination up of your children. And so I think that he is somebody that you can appreciate as a family. You can be reading books as an adult that he's written, but you could be talking about books that he's written for your kids, and he can become a family friend. I think his creativity is second to none. Nobody illustrates, in my opinion, better than C.S. Lewis. In fact, there's a part of me that wants to, rebel against the C.S. Lewis fan club, but I can't, and I understand why, because his writing is just so beautiful. His tone in which he writes is fascinating, because when he's writing and he's taking you on a journey with him. And it's fascinating because he'll say things like he's writing, and as he's writing along, he'll have a change of mind. He go, well, on second thought, I take that back and let me word it like this. And so, I mean, if he was really just editing all that stuff out, but you're a part of his process. I think that he deals with issues that are very relevant to today. I mean, he deals with morals. He deals with marriage. He deals with right and wrong. He deals with how to, ground morality. He deals with the importance of education and the problems with relativism. So when you're tracking the works of Lewis, you're dealing with somebody who's dealt with issues that are still all too common for us today. And finally, I just think he provides a great pattern for what it looks like to write, to reach people who are interested in Christianity. He's totally bereft of Christianese. He thinks of ways to absolutely illustrate so that people can see the Christian story, perhaps through an illustration that they never thought of. And honestly, I'm just scratching the surface, but I'll stop with that.
The first C.S. Lewis book I read was The Screwtape Letters. Mm-hmm. And I had heard of C.S. Lewis. I probably read the Narnia books as a kid, but that was a long time ago. And I think I saw the Narnia Disney movie that came out. But there's an actor named Max McLean who did a one-man stage play on the Screwtape Letters. And so we were giving away tickets here at the station. They had some for staff. So I went, and I was just amazed by what I saw on stage. And and Max McLean's memory too. But it was just amazing. So then afterwards I read the book, and I had already seen it all on stage, but it just reminded me of some of the different things that I had seen, and what a great way to look at spiritual warfare. And there's so much in there that we would never even imagine necessarily. But C.S. Lewis just kind of drew it out. And like you said, Bobby, he's just got this imagination where he can talk about things that we wouldn't have thought about. Can you remember any of those specifics? I'm trying to remember some right now, but there's different ones where he'll talk about the woman who's looking down on people when she herself is... I'm trying to remember what the analogy was, and I can't think of it right now. Help me, Bobby.
Yeah, well, there's lots, right? I mean, there's the guy that's struggling with his lust and he can't let it go. And it's this lizard hanging on his, resting on his shoulder, and he's going to chop that bad boy off. I mean, there is so many good stories. In fact, Screwtape Letters, when I was in seminary, we all had to read that. And then we had to break in groups. We had to write our own Screwtape letter in a page, basically.
Really?
Right?
Wow.
One page. If you were Satan and you knew about yourself, what you know about yourself, how would you go about taking yourself out? And so that is a great exercise as well. So C.S. Lewis has so much to offer. I really encourage people to, read his stuff. There are certain works that are, harder to grasp than others, like his book on miracles or The Problem of Pain would be, or Mere Christianity. Some people might find more difficult if they're a new believer. Nevertheless, it's like there's a door to get into the house of C.S. Lewis. You just got to figure out which door to enter.
Phil?
I think, one of my favorite books by him is A Grief Observed. I think it is an absolutely
Oh my goodness, it's so good.
brilliant, painful truth of it's books, letters that were compiled
I love it.
after his wife had passed away, and he didn't even put it in his name originally, just because he wanted it to, just to be out there and not to have to be associated with him per se. But I mean, the death of a beloved is an amputation, things like that. I love some of these phrases that he had. Nobody ever told me how similar grief and fear are. I love that. It's a very powerful, powerful book. I had read Mere Christianity, love it. Grew up reading Chronicles of Narnia. Didn't grow up in the Christian home in the same way, but those books are just transcendent, and fell in love with that. And then you get introduced to The Hobbit. You move into Tolkien's work through C.S. Lewis, I think, for most of us kids. But when I was, walking with the Lord longer, and I picked up A Grief Observed, I was blown away at he is as raw and as honest as you could ever be. I think for somebody going through hardship, A Grief Observed is just a powerful, powerful book.
Bobby?
You're exactly right. In fact, we have a lady that just lost her son, and my wife met with her last week, and I gave her a copy of A Grief Observed to take to her. Only 80-some pages, and it's so authentic, Phil. And for those that don't know, Lewis spent most of his life as a single man, and then ended up marrying Joy, and they were married, and she was dying of cancer, and they had a short 3-year marriage, and he would, die just a few years after her death, but it was incredibly painful. So there's so much that we love about Lewis, but maybe just a few things that I would say is concerning about Lewis, because we all have things that we should be concerned about, right? And there's positives and negatives to all of us. But I think that, he mentions praying to the dead. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I don't understand kind of the point there. He had a belief in purgatory, which would obviously be Catholicism. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He was an Anglican, but kind of the old guard Anglican. And then his belief in inclusivism. So he would believe that, other people from different faith traditions could be included in God's salvific plan. I think what he does in talking about purgatory, for example, is it minimizes the atonement. And so when you start thinking about a place to go and be purged, now you're starting to water down the atonement. So on one level, he has a great understanding of what the gospel is. And then on another level, he pours water on the fire that he stoked for us. And so I would just say those would be 3 doctrinal pieces that I would remove myself from him on. And yet we can appreciate so much about him.
I was talking about Max McLean on stage doing the Screw Tape Letters, and you can go to Max McLean's website. His organization is called the Fellowship for the Performing Arts, and their website is fpatheater.com. Theater spelled the British way, R-E, not E-R, but fpatheater.com. In fact, I should probably say it the British way, fpatheater.com. But go there and you can find out more about the Fellowship for the Performing Arts. And there's one coming here to Southern California in just a few weeks, so that's going to be fun. Yes, indeed. So Joe in California had a question about C.S. Lewis. In fact, Joe, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, it's regarding C.S. Lewis and then about the Ark of the Covenant. Like C.S. Lewis, I tried reading. I mean, some of his books, like Mere Christianity, I just totally love it and understand it. But I think some of his books are for me, they're really hard to follow or understand. You know, it seems like maybe it's just the English is different from the American English,
Yeah, that could have something to do with it. Bobby, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Okay, so for example, when I became a Christian, I was totally uneducated, didn't read a book that I can remember except for Judy Blume's Freckle Juice. I mean, I was
and he still has his copy of it. It's back there on his shelf.
Yeah,
there.
right.
Look,
Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bonehead, and I can remember taking a stab at Mere Christianity as an early Christian, and I found it difficult at that time. Now I would find it actually really light reading. I don't find any of his reading. I find all that to say, like, if I'm reading Lewis, all of his reading pretty much for his popular level books feels light to me. Well, that's because there's been growth. And so all that to say, it might feel difficult at first, but if you just stick with it, you'll learn to appreciate it. So developing a fine taste for things, it takes time to learn how to become an expert in picking off the different notes. So if somebody's a wine taster, they can, really sophisticate their ability to taste wine and pick off the different notes, whether it's a chocolate note or, a fruity note or a nutty note. I'm sounding like I have some experience in this. I didn't do wine tasting. I did wine guzzling in my past. So I wouldn't have been good for this. But all that to say, you'll sophisticate yourself. So don't feel bad about it. You're right. He is writing many decades ago. It's different from the time we're at. And I would say that, start with his children's books, because those will definitely be trackable. But then as it relates to apologetics, maybe you kind of read Timothy Keller. And he's from somebody who will talk a lot about Lewis. And then once you get familiar with Keller's work, then you can kind of move your way into a Lewis. But then you work your way into a Lewis, and then you can work your way into a Geiser. You work your way into a Geiser, you can work your way into a William Lane Craig. Work your way into William Lane Craig, you can work yourself into an Alvin Plantinga. And so there's these different levels, and it's just like strength training. You just have to prepare yourself for it. And I think there's a lot of people that totally have the capacity to read this stuff, but on first take, they don't like the way it tastes, and so they don't try it again. I'd say keep going back. You'll develop a taste.
If anything, Joe, go see the play when it comes out in a few weeks. And that, like I said, that was my first real introduction, aside from the Disney Narnia thing. That was my introduction to one of his books in this form of watching it performed on stage, and I thought it was really good. Joe, I know you had another question, but your phone line was kind of staticky, so maybe we'll go back to you in a little bit. But Richard Cimino is here, sitting in for Brian Broderson. He's one of the assistant pastors at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Richard, do you have a favorite C.S. Lewis book?
Oh, love the Chronicles of Narnia. Love Mere Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just talking about the importance of why every Christian should read C.S. Lewis.
Well, question. Am I on?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, and I'm on. Okay, did he have a British accent?
Yes.
Okay, because it'd be weird.
Kind of, yes.
Okay, because it'd be weird if he just had a total, American accent.
Dude.
It would just not work for me. I can't hear Wormwood in, American.
So you're saying that
can't.
Demons have British accents, is what you're saying? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Sorry
because
to all of our...
there's the eloquence of that language.
Yes.
And I think that's what Bobby's talking about there. You have to understand that, you don't start reading Shakespeare in second grade. you got to build up. You build up with that because you get tolerant to understanding how language is used and literature is written. And I think C.S. Lewis, that's a bygone generation of writers, and you won't pick it up. And some people, you pick up Mere Christianity, you try to read it, and you're like, I must be a terrible Christian because I can't understand. You're just not a British, eloquent Oxford-speaking guy from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah,
right.
It's a very different time.
Mm-hmm.
It just came to my mind. There's a book. I can't remember the guy's first name. His last name's Marsden. And he wrote a biography.
Bruce Marsden?
Bruce Marsden,
right,
a biography of Mere Christianity. He kind of tells the story
That's a great book.
of the book and how it was developed and how it came into being. It's really, really good. And it gives you kind of an insight into where he was at, context of history when he wrote it. And it's really brilliant.
Makes a difference.
Yeah, so Max McLean, I don't remember if he was from Britain or not, but he did, the theater kind of presentation and everything. So yeah, it was
That's
really
great.
Good. Yep. So Joe, thanks for calling us today. And like I said, we'll check in with you a little bit later to get your other question. First, I want to go to a question that was sent in online using the form on our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. There's a Pastor's Perspective page now where you can get archives to all of our programs and also submit a question. But Jasmine sent this one in, and she says, please pray for my 2 teenage daughters. This was the response of my 18-year-old daughters when I asked her about her faith and relationship with God. And Jasmine's daughter says, for now, I cannot believe in a being that lets his people suffer the way we do. God was as powerful and good. If God was as powerful and good as it says in the Bible, he would have gotten rid of Satan and sin long ago. Why would someone that loves his children let them suffer for one person's mistakes? I've tried to understand and try to believe, but I just don't think it is time for that type of relationship with God. Phil, what do you say to Jasmine's daughter?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot that she said in there. First of all, those are some brilliant thought processes. Let's not discredit that. That is I don't want to just even say logical, but it is absolutely makes sense. Like, why would a God, if God is X, Y, and Z, then why is he letting these things happen? Totally fair. One thing I would want to highlight, just because there was a lot to process in that, I think there's something that we can do a disjustice or an injustice when we make it sound like because of one person's mistakes. The Bible says that one person sinned, that's true, and that sin came into the world. But the Bible also tells us that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So sin did not just we were not condemned because of Adam's sin per se, that it was just Adam that did that and none of us were a part of that. It's that sin was introduced into the world, but all of us, the Bible says, have fallen short of the glory of God. So I just want to make that, I know everybody can, speak into a different part of that, but I think that's really important for her daughter to understand that while her thinking is not wrong at all, it would be good to clarify it's not that one person's mistakes have condemned us all. All have sinned, the Bible says, and fallen short of the glory of God. And that through one man's redemptive work, Jesus, all can be born again. So we've all fallen short, but it was one man, the God-man, who became one of us and died for all of us. His work of redemption brings salvation to all of us. So we all have sinned, but one man's redemptive work has brought salvation. That needs to be understood. That's a big difference.
Yes, and also this God who seems aloof and distant or unjust actually stepped into our suffering, broken world, and himself suffered horrific injustice. He suffered abandonment, desertion, cruelty, insults, and he endured all of that so that he could actually take the place of the world that had turned its back on him and actually conquer suffering by his own suffering, to bear all of our brokenness and to settle stuff so that he can one day usher in a world where there will be no more suffering, no more pain, no more death, no more sorrow. So, and Bobby, I know you can really talk into the idea of the statement that if God were strong enough, he must not. He's either not strong enough to save us, or he doesn't love us enough to save us. And I'm sure you've answered that multiple times.
Well, I think that the question is understandable, but we have to think our questions through. And I would just encourage this young lady to think about what she's saying. I don't know if we realize what we're asking for when we ask for a world that doesn't have the suffering that it has in it. In other words, we get frustrated at God, but God is in a situation, I think, at times with us as humans where he's darned if he does and he's darned if he doesn't. So in other words, how could God have created the world that we live in whereby we didn't have suffering? Well, if he would have created us without free will, that would have allowed for that to take place. But then if we could, you couldn't because you'd be a robot. And if you did say it, it really wouldn't matter. But you would complain against the fact that why you're a robot. Why didn't God let us be free? Why am I forced into this world of perfection? Why didn't God trust me enough to have a crack at life myself? Well, he does create us originally in the best possible setting. And in the best possible setting, we reject God. And what happened to Adam and Eve is the same story that happens to all of us. We all know the good that we ought to do, and we don't do it. And therefore, we take life into our own hands. And so we get frustrated at God for creating us in a world that allows us to suffer. And we think that's cruel of God. But God does it because he wants a relationship with us. So if we're going to logically say that God's bad for having children, then we need to also logically say that we're bad as parents for having children and bringing children into a world that's so messed up, and how unloving it is for us to have kids where they're going to come into a world and suffer. Well, why in the world would we do that? Aren't we operating like, if God's our creator and he brings us into this world and we get mad at him? Well, maybe you should be mad at your mom as well for having you. Like, how dare your mom have you and bring you into this world where there's so much suffering? So you're not mad at your mom, right? You still love your mom, and you can understand the motivation that your mom would have had for wanting to have you so that you could have a life. Well, why can't we put that back on God and realize, okay, given free will, this world's going to be jacked up. It's going to be fallen. There's going to be sin. But even still, God creates us with the perfect opportunity. We blow it. Then when we blow it, he still sends prophets and messengers and a Messiah to come and die and rise again. And then he gives us the opportunity to be forgiven through himself, through what he pulled off in the atonement by dying on a cross for our sins in the person of Jesus. And then yet we reject that. So what more can God do, right? He's done it all. And so I feel like at this stage, we can just step back. And the last thing I'd say is, and not only that, if there wasn't the world that we live in, there's attributes of God that would have been forever disclosed. In other words, you would never know that God loves you unconditionally if the world you lived in was always perfect, whereby you always met the conditions. Therefore, in a world whereby we break his moral laws, we see that we don't fulfill his moral conditions, and yet he still loves us unconditionally. Or we wouldn't know what forgiveness is unless we lived in a world whereby we could sin against God. We wouldn't know what mercy is. We wouldn't know what grace is. So in other words, we would also, so you cash in on your free will, you're a robot. You live forever without a knowledge of unconditional love, forgiveness, mercy, and grace. I'll take those attributes that God has revealed in himself, and when we show the ugliness of our sin, what God does is he comes through and he says, oh, here's some attributes of mine that you never would have known I had it not been for the fallen world. That's how good God is.
30 seconds, Richard.
Yes, I'll just read it right out, some stuff I had written. There on the cross, the righteous judge took the place of the guilty. There on the cross, the one who is truth triumphed over lies. The one who is love conquered hatred. The one who is righteous and just conquered selfishness and injustice. The one who is light conquered the darkness that ruled the world he created and so loved. There on the cross, Jesus defeated Satan, sin, and death. There on the cross, Jesus paid in full the price of our redemption and opened to us the kingdom of God.
Good stuff. Jasmine, thank you for sending in your questions from your daughters on the Pastor's Perspective page at kwave.com. And we do pray for you as you raise these young ladies. We are going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more of your questions. Give us a call. Grab an open line. 888-564-6173 is the number. That's 888-564-6173. Okay, we are back here on Pastor's Perspective. My name is Brian Perez. Thank you so much for joining us today on the radio, live on Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening if you're on the East Coast, or Friday morning if you're in Australia or Japan. My time zones might be off, but I know we've gotten calls from, places like that. So thank you so much for listening, and also for watching us on Facebook and YouTube, or maybe you're listening on a podcast. Thank you for doing that as well. We are here Tuesday through Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. On Thursdays, we stick around till 5 o'clock. That's why we're not here on Mondays. The second hour on Thursday gets played out on Mondays. So give us a call today from now till 5 at 888-564-6173. That's 888-564-6173. And to answer your questions today, we have brought in Phil Metzger from Calvary San Diego and Richard Cimino from Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa. And on the Bobby Cam, it's Bobby Conway from Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, who will be here in the studio with us next week. Can't wait to see him here in person. Give him a fist bump. Like a real fist bump, not just on the screen, not the same. But and Bobby's also going to be speaking at Reliance Church in Temecula this Saturday. It's a youth conference for junior high and high school. You can find out more about that at reliancechurch.org. Shall we continue, folks?
Get it. Let's do it.
All right, let's do this. So we'll start with Joe. Hopefully there's not that background noise going on anymore. So Joe, what was your other question that you had? Joe's not there. Joe? Well, Joe wanted to know if the ark is in heaven right now, based on Revelation 11:19. What do you know, Phil?
I know that we don't know.
That'll work.
Yeah. No, I mean, gosh, it's funny because there's Yeah, I mean, I don't think we could use that scripture to say it's definitely in heaven, for one. Where is it exactly? Gosh, a lot of speculation on that. From Jeremiah and his movement into Ethiopia to, gosh, I've been into Ethiopia so many times, and they are convinced they got the ark. It's crazy. But I don't think Revelation 11:19, to his question that he did not get to ask, is proof that the ark is in heaven. No.
Yeah, Bobby?
Yeah, that's a great answer. I would just say that that ark that is in heaven. It's a separate ark. And so basically a heavenly temple that's mirroring the earthly temple, yet obviously in its most perfect state.
All right, Joe, thanks for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. Now we're going to talk to Teresa in Riverside, California. Hello, Teresa. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, pastors.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm going to try and make a short question, which is of a lot of years built up. I have my son. He's 26 years old, and it's just me and him. And I'll try not to cry over it. But there was never a father home. And I'm like older now, and I'm tired of always arguing and shutting up because I don't want trouble in my home. And my son is saved. You know, he goes to church. It's just he comes against me with everything that I say, everything that I do, even when it comes to even scriptures or advice, any type of advice. He goes to concerts that's not Christian, and I don't want to be a religious kind of mom, you know. And none of his uncles or anybody ever took him in or mentored him, and it seems like he always has an angry attitude with me. Everything I say is no good. Everything I do is no good. But yet I'm there for him with everything that he needs.
And he lives with you, Teresa?
He lives with me, yeah, since the day he was born.
Mm-hmm. Is he employed at the moment?
Yes, he works, and he works hard.
Okay.
Can you give an example of like what would be an example of a discussion that just is rife with tension and the kinds of moments that he gets really he's not happy with you or he's mad at you? Like what would be one of those examples?
Well, his attitude always seems mad at me no matter what it is. For example, I'll give you an example. This morning I tried just to give him some advice. He goes to concerts a lot over in Orange County, and they're not Christian concerts. So I just kind of gave him a little advice, and I said, son, you're going to 4 concerts this month. I'm like, why don't you just not go where the Spirit of the Lord is not? I said, there's lots of evil, son, that's going on in this world, and that's not a very good environment. You know, I said, the Bible warns us not to go into environments like that purposely, you know. And that's all I got to say.
Okay.
You know, and my sentence didn't get fully said, and he just put me down with everything I know, people I listen to, you know, pastors I listen to, and, you know, they're not in the truth. And
Wait, so she put us down? Okay, now I'm mad. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Hey,
Phil, what
Teresa,
would you say?
can I suggest something that, you know, he's 26, he has a job, you guys are having a lot of tension. Here's one possible solution. It's time for him to move out. It's time for him to get his own place. You guys are, you know, your son and mom, and you're still mom. And it's time for him to have to be a man. And, you know, he sounds like a decent person. You said he loves the Lord. Yeah, he's going to concerts and all, but he's 26 years old. You don't need to be the one that, you know, you're not the Holy Spirit. And I'm not saying you're trying to be, but I think you guys are like literally a few walls away at all times. Might be a good time for you guys to talk about at least him moving out. And that might help your guys' relationship. Just when he's responsible for his own life, which I'm sure he feels he already is, might be a good idea to get a little bit of space.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along those same lines. And then also, I'll just throw this out to you. Like, I'm wondering if there's a venue not far from here that's a real local Orange County concert venue. Mm-hmm. And man, I've seen lines down the street at that venue. And I know my son, who's a Christian, plays in a band that's not quote unquote Christian, but they've played in that venue before and packed filled with a bunch of people. And I know my son's not demonic, and I know he's not anti-Jesus. He just loves to play music, and he plays his music as unto the Lord and for the Lord, and then he uses his talents to bless other people. And so I would say that there's probably a little bit of a gulf around that subject and how it's understood that probably is one that has been going on for so long that it's instant. I'm not happy about this conversation. It's instant shutdown, and it might be just one of those things where you just kind of like let that one breathe for a little bit. And unless he's coming back from those concerts like wasted and shouldn't have been on the road, you might want to just maybe give that one a rest, because it's hard to say. Like, I just know my son. He's a great human being who happens to love Jesus, and he plays in secular events all the time, and he's actually brought something of the kingdom of God to bear upon people who walk backstage, people who don't know the Lord, people who've actually told me, like, hey, no one's ever treated me like a human being, and your son is so kind. I don't understand it. Like some of these big names in music that have come through and that I've had to, serve as a stage guy, like I don't exist. And your son was so kind to me. So that happens in some of those places. And Jesus says we are the light of the world. In fact, we're the very light of the world. And without us, it's just, there's no light.
Yeah.
So I would just say that's one conversation that maybe you can step back from a little bit and maybe rethink through a little bit. I'm not asking you to surrender your convictions, but just rethink it a little bit.
Bobby Conway?
Well, I would 100% want to piggyback on what Phil started, what Richard agreed with, and what I would concur with. And we're living in a time where mom and dads, parenting is hard for an 18-year run. And now the culture that we're living in, you've got parents trying to parent their kids and up into their 30s, for crying out loud. And so kids are overstaying their welcome, and you can't learn what it means to appreciate the way you were raised until you're outside of your home.
Yep.
Like that's when you really fully begin to appreciate it. And so what seems like is taking place is there's entitlement in the home. There's a lack of appreciation, and there's a temptation for you to still parent, yet he's 26 and he doesn't want to be parented, yet he might want to be in your home. So if he's going to be in your home, he needs to be open to some parenting. And there just comes a point where it's time to leave. And there needs to be a plan in place. Again, he's 26. I don't know. Some kids might use fear tactics. I can't afford it. I can't do this. And then they'll play on all that. Like when you're 26, the hourglass is empty. I mean, it's time to have a plan in place unless there's some severe medical or mental issues that are going on. Because what's going to happen is the relationship is functioning in a way it's not meant to. I mean, he's supposed to be out manning up, becoming an adult. And it's the same thing. I got a 22-year-old son living at the house, and that's my biggest burden. How do I adult him? How do I get him outside of the four walls so that he can grow, learn to appreciate the household that he grew up in, so that he can develop more skills, and so that our relationship can go to the next level. That is so important. So when you end up seeing him become an empty nest, guess what? Or leaving the nest, you don't have to parent him. The relationship moves more into like a friendship. Right now, it's probably a coach. You kind of go from a parent to a coach to a friend. You're always the parent, but you're operating more like a coach at a certain stage, and then it's a deep friendship. But my fear is you're still stuck in that parent-child relationship, and that would be the absolute number one thing that I would figure out. How do we do this? I wouldn't go home and just scare the life out of them. I would say, how do we have a conversation, get on the same page, realize it'll be good for our dynamic, it'll be good for your adulting, it'll be good for my sanity. It's just too much for parents to have to be parenting kids to their 30 years of age. And it's too much for kids. I don't even know why kids would want that. And they don't. They don't want to be parented, but they want the resources of a parent. And you know what? That's where you got to go off an adult.
And that's also a need. They need to know, like, how do I manage my own resources? How do I make a way in the world? And I have a 26-year-old son, and not the same son I was just talking about, but I have a son, and he has to have roommates. He has to learn how to live with his peers and get along with peers and be responsible for all the stuff that happens in his life. So that's great stuff, both Bobby and Phil.
I was going to say too, like, I think as our kids get into their, mid-20s and so on, everybody's experiences are different, by the way. We all acknowledge that.
Yep.
There's circumstances where it's like, they have to live at home. And Bobby, you mentioned some of those, and I'm sure there's more. But there is something to be said about, I think it was really good when you differentiated between being a parent and being a friend. Sometimes we keep parenting when they just need a friend. And so we have to stop. We are supposed to be a friend.
Yep.
And, and vice versa. If you have a child that's an adult like that living in your home, they're not going to know what the line is. And that's really a problem. Like, wait, are you talking to me as a friend right now or as a parent? And it's always going to get blurred. You need to create space so that you can have clear lines.
Yeah, and a point where you go, hey, if you ask me my opinion, this is just my opinion.
Yeah, you can't give it unless you're asked, right?
Yes, and so if they're asking, you can give an opinion, but in the dynamic of you guys are still living in the same house, it's not going to be a very safe dynamic.
Another dynamic I thought of was, Teresa and her son are living here in Southern California, where housing is very expensive. So Teresa says her son has a job, he works hard, he has money for concerts, so maybe he contributes towards the rent or the mortgage living with his mom. And if he moved out, now mom is in need of a roommate and that income. So now what happens to mom? And maybe that's part
fair.
of it too.
And that's and that's kind of one of those dynamics. We live in a really insane housing market right now. And so that's a reality. But then create real lines. You can still create clarity. You're going to pay $1,500 a month in rent. That's a going rate for renting a room in wherever I'm just making up numbers.
Nope,
and that creates like ownership. This is mine. This is my response. Okay, fine. You want me to be a renter, but this is my expectations. You're not going to ask me about these things. You don't get to decide what time I come home. I am an adult, and I think you can banter back and forth on that. It's a really good point, Brian, especially here in California.
All right, Teresa, thank you for your phone call today here on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173 is our number. And now we'll talk to Karina in Murrieta, California. Hello, Karina. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet. How can we help you?
I was just calling to figure out, ask why God was able to be in Satan's presence in his fallen state. I believe it's in the book of Job. He talks about Satan, how he got there. So that God cannot look upon sin.
Right. God can't look upon sin, but yet here is Satan himself, literally, in God's presence. How did God even allow that? How did he not say, get out of here, get thee behind me, Satan, or something like that? Bobby, what would you say to Karina?
Well, I think it's helpful for us to remember, first off, that God is omnipresent, so nothing escapes his presence on one side of the matter. On the other side, Satan, in going to God, it goes to show that even though he's been cast out of being in God's continuous presence, where God is showing himself, like God's everywhere at once, but he still shows up. And the place he really shows up is in heaven, but he's still everywhere at once, right? So what is revival? Well, when the ever-present God makes himself known and shows up. So God's everywhere at once, but he still shows up. And yet Satan has been removed from God's continuous presence, that place where God has showed up continually for the angelic realm. And now outside of that realm, he still has access only because Satan is on a leash and he falls under the sovereignty of God. And when Satan wants to do things, even the things that Satan is doing, there are things that he does that fall under the sovereignty of God. And so you go, well, why then would God leverage Satan to tempt Job? And God will use Satan to do things that he wants to do. And the purpose of Satan is to tempt us. Yet the purpose of God allowing Satan to tempt us is not to tempt us, but to test us so that we'll grow and become more like Christ. And all of us know that testing makes us stronger. So that is ultimately why. He seems as if he's got some access. We don't know how much, we don't know how often, and we don't know how long those interactions are, but we know that he does not have privilege to say in God's continuous heavenly presence.
Richard?
Yeah, and I remember asking this question of Pastor Chuck like years and years ago when I was just first on staff here ages ago, and I said, how do you look at that passage in Job, and then there's Habakkuk 1:13 that you referred to. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and Pastor Chuck said that the language there it's essentially to look on it with approval. So God sees evil everywhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't look on it with approval. And then also, it's interesting to note that God's the one who initiates the conversation with Satan. So quite interesting.
It's good. No, I just loved that. I was just agreeing with you the whole way there, Richard. Yeah, and I think, too, Satan is not sin. He is not the embodiment of sin. He sinned, but he is not the embodiment of sin. So, and I don't think we should imagine that there's like these conversations are happening every day where, the devil's in heaven talking to God. This is not like this is a very unique experience we read about here in the Bible.
Karina, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173 is our number. We're here till 5 p.m. Pacific time today, so if we don't get to your call before 4, don't hang up. Stay on the phone, because we will likely get to you the second hour, but we'll try to get to you this hour. That being said, now let's talk to Kevin from Los Angeles, California. Welcome to the program, Kevin.
Hi.
Now, I noticed that Phil chuckled when I said Los Angeles. Did you know that was actually the way to say the phrase back in the long time ago? That's what I learned recently.
I did not know that.
I didn't either.
I learn something every day.
I heard a few people saying it before, and I thought, why do they say it that way? And then I found out.
Los Angeles. I can see that.
Yeah.
Los Angeles.
Anyway, Kevin, sorry. Go ahead. What's your question?
So I was talking to someone about music direction.
Hold on. You've got a really bad connection. I don't know if you're on speakerphone or Bluetooth or what's going on, but it sounds really bad.
What about now?
Much better.
I think. All right. So I was talking to someone about Jesus' resurrection and how I believe that the most probable outcome is that Jesus did resurrect. And then he was telling me that he thinks the most probable one is that the guards just got distracted and the body was missing.
And who took the body? Did they say who took the body? The disciples?
No, not really. Because to that, I guess I would tell them that what would they want to die if they took the body themselves? But they just said that the guards got distracted and that's how the body went missing.
Richard?
Well, from what we know of history, the penalty for falling asleep on guard duty as a Roman would be you'd be executed by being burnt alive, and so would the whole guard unit with you. So they were highly motivated guys to be paying attention, and that was kind of the line that the religious rulers wanted to send to Pilate. That, hey, just tell him that you were sleeping. But even that doesn't make sense, because how do you know who took the body if you were sleeping? So it's not a great argument.
Yeah, the whole argument, it just lacks like real thought, because again, you take those same disciples. If we're just going to take the account of the New Testament here, these same people who are supposedly the ones who stole the body, on two accounts. Number one, these were cowards, and I'm not putting them down. I'm saying there's no way you were going to go up against the might of Rome. It's just not realistic, one, or logical, two. But here's the big one. They all later determined to make a statement that Jesus had risen from the dead, to the extent that they were willing to die for that supposed truth. That becomes the most illogical thing. No one, you could not keep all of those people all connected around a lie. The very idea of, hey, we all have the same story. Let's make sure we stay in alignment. It never works out. It's just not possible. Not to the extent where you're willing to die for that supposed truth. So the most logical, just based on what we read in the scriptures, the most logical conclusion is that Jesus did rise from the dead, that the Roman guards were, knocked out, in a sense, asleep. And even the disciples were surprised in the New Testament. Even they didn't believe that Jesus was going to rise from the dead. So when they saw him risen, they were shocked. So it wouldn't make sense to believe that he was that they had stolen his body.
Unless it was one of the other, not the 11, but the ones
Right.
that, I mean, which ones? I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know. But then you get into the issue of like, even if that were to, let's just draw that, like walk that all the way out. How could you convince a Peter to die for this belief that Jesus had risen from the dead? There was no value to it whatsoever. It was pain and suffering for hundreds of years for Christians, especially in those early years. There would be no reason you couldn't convince that many people to be so consistent in their same messaging and in their own convictions. Because, yeah, maybe somebody else stole the body, right? But the fact that people were willing to die the way they were is a powerful, powerful reality.
Totally. Bobby Conway?
Yeah, good stuff, guys. Perhaps what I could add to this is just to imagine the absurdity of Jesus getting past the guards. You've got a 2-ton stone that's rolled in front of the tomb, which is 4,000 pounds. He's buried in 150 pounds of burial cloth. So if he didn't rise from the grave, then are you taking him out like completely wrapped up? Or do you have the time, like while the guards are supposedly distracted, to unwrap him and then take him? Just try in your head to picture how absurd the scene is, how noisy it would be, and how many people you would need to be able to just distract the Roman guards, to be able to get Jesus out of the tomb. And then why in the world would they want to take his body out of the tomb and go say that he's alive and then pay a price for that when they already ran from him the night before? Mm-hmm. So they saw something. Not only that, the Bible records women as the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection. And if you were trying to make up history or a story, you would never include women as the testimony of the ones who first discovered the empty tomb. Everything about it, all of the reasons that people come up with arguments against the resurrection, I find that it's easier to believe in the resurrection than the swoon theory, than the twin brothers theory, than the hallucination theory, than the stolen body theory. And not only that, flip it and let's just say that the skeptics stole the body. Well, once the disciples are saying he's alive, what would they have done? No, you guys are lying. He is right here. We took him. Okay, the disciples stole the body. Okay, well then why would they steal the body, go hide his body, and now go and subject their bodies to death? They wouldn't. Sometimes it's just easier to believe the truth than it is to come up with the myths to hold on to sweep it away.
Richard?
No, it's great. It's great stuff.
The twin brother theory is one of
that's
the
great,
funniest
isn't
ones
it?
I've heard. Yeah.
I was going to say too, I love that
Bummer to
book, The
be the
Case for
twin.
Christ. If you have never read the book, The Case for Christ, it's a great book.
Yep.
It's such a great read. He's such a great writer. I really recommend it for people wanting to learn more about this stuff.
Yep, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Kevin, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back with a full hour of the Pastor's Perspective program. If you're on hold right now, stay on hold. We'll get to you in a few minutes, and we're going to keep the phone lines open. So give us a call from now till 5 p.m. Pacific time at 888-564. Why am I forgetting it now? Oh, well. Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.